As we look forward to 2022, we hope that this year will be one of renewed hope. For the past 2 years, the world has been rocked by the COVID pandemic, but we hope this year will be a year of dawning solutions. Finally, the Beijing Winter Olympic and Paralympic Games will be held. There will be many difficulties, but I hope that everything will be accomplished with success. I'm very happy to see lots of old friends. And for this new year, we all have new hopes. Especially in the past 2 years, the world has been affected by the COVID pandemic. So we hope that this year we will have a year of solutions. The Beijing Winter Olympic Games and Paralympic Games will be held. There will be many difficulties, but I hope that everything will be accomplished with success. It is worth remembering that the Tokyo Olympics and the Paralympics were held in Japan last summer, a year later than originally scheduled. The Tokyo Olympics and Paralympics, as you know, had a tortuous journey. First of all, due to the global spread of COVID, the Olympic Games were postponed by 1 year to last summer. There was a lot of debate about whether it was really appropriate to hold the Olympic Games in the pandemic. And some people even said that it should be cancelled or postponed further. The organizers, the Tokyo Metropolitan Government, and the people involved in the Games, who had assumed for a long time that the Games would be held, had high hopes for the Games to be held. So did each and every athlete in the world who had worked so hard to achieve this day. As a result, it was decided to go ahead with the Games under the drastic policy of no spectators, meaning that there would be no visitors other than those involved in the Games. The idea of no spectators seemed far-fetched. I myself was skeptical at first, wondering if it could be called a sports game without an audience. But when I thought about it, I realized that we should take into account the fact that, unlike in the past, television is now a global phenomenon. The technology for filming has improved, and the filming equipment, especially high-resolution TV cameras, capable of capturing extremely detailed images such as 4K and 8K, has become widespread. Given this, it is easy to see how the game can be much more accessible than going to the stadium and watching it from a distance. It is true that some of the athletes said that without the spectators, they would not be able to fight, or that the cheers of the spectators would make them work harder. But many of them also said that it was good to be able to concentrate on their own game. In fact, I am sure that the athletes left the stadium feeling satisfied that they had given their all to their performances, and that in this age of television, people were able to enjoy their favorite players and games while watching them in their respective countries. So for the athletes, that was also a very satisfactory solution. Rather, it is also with great satisfaction and admiration that the Tokyo Metropolitan Government, the government of Japan, and many others involved in the Olympic and the Paralympic Games had managed to pull it off without the disruptions of the pandemic. So we hope that Beijing will also be able to repeat the experience in Tokyo, and that it will be just as successful, if not even more so. And we will look forward to watching the Olympic Games in action in front of our TV sets. On the international front, the issue of the year will be the US-China relationship. And the longer the conflict between the US and China continues, the more easy the international situation will become. I'm not prepared to limit myself to pessimism about US-China relations. Our understanding from the virtual US-China summit late last year is that President Biden believes that a confrontation between the US and China is not inevitable, and that he will do everything in his power to ensure that the competition does not lead to a confrontation, and that he agrees with President Xi Jinping on this point. From the point of view of the United States, it seems to be aiming to turn the international public opinion against China by appealing to other countries to make a pretense of encircling China in response to China's moves in the South China Sea and democratic movements in Hong Kong, Xinjiang, and Taiwan. One of the issues that must be considered as part of the situation underlying such moves is the economic issue. And particularly important is the imbalance in trade between the US and China. That is how to balance the US deficit and the Chinese surplus. And this is probably the biggest issue. During the New Year's holiday, I had the opportunity to look at past documents and think about the fact that in the past, Japan also had a very difficult time in the same position as China today. This was about 40 years ago, in the 1970s. At that time, Japan was suffering from a trade surplus with the USA. Germany also ran a large surplus with the USA, although not as large as Japan's. Ironically, the defeated nations of World War II, Japan and Germany, had the upper hand in the international economy at that time. The United States wanted to change the exchange rate drastically in order to reduce the trade gap. And in 1985, the G5 members convened at the Plaza Hotel in New York and decided to raise the exchange rate drastically for Japan and Germany. This decision was known as the Plaza Accord. What happened to Japan's exchange rate as a result of the Plaza Accord? The dominant view in Japan was the principle that the correction of trade disparities was to be achieved by raising the rate of the country with excess exports, which would reduce the volume of imports and thus reduce the trade deficit of the importing country. Japan responded to this principle by raising the exchange rate from 240 yen to the dollar at the time of the Plaza Accord to 160 yen by the end of the following year, an increase of nearly 70%. And 2 years later, at the end of 1987, to 120 yen, an increase of 100%. 2 years later, at the end of 19 1987, the exchange rate was raised by 100% to 120 yen. The result, of course, was that exports stagnated and the burden fell on domestic and manufacturers of exported goods, of which small and medium-sized enterprises were the majority. In other words, a recession followed a strong yen. In order to overcome this recession, the government cut interest rates. As a result, surplus funds went into land and real estate, creating a so-called bubble. Some of the surplus money went on to buy iconic US assets, such as the Rockefeller Center in New York, and the anti-Japanese momentum of the American people was quickly raised. Japan had let its economy run its course and finally done something that struck a chord with the US. Then came the US criticism of Japan. When the Gulf War broke out, sparked by Iraq's invasion of Kuwait, the criticism of Japan doing nothing, and the US tried hard to contain the situation by offering 1.5 trillion yen or 13 billion US dollars. This sequence of events suggests that the US had taken Japan's moves well and had successfully dodged the trade deficit problem by making appropriate and sometimes excessive demands. To resolve the trade imbalance, it is necessary to adjust the exchange rate, but it is also necessary to change the nature of the economy, which causes the imbalance in the medium and long term. And in this respect, the US seems to have taken various measures, including the introduction of a free economy. However, in the context of a financial economy, its excesses led to the collapse of Lehman Brothers, which showed the limits of this system. While we were busy dealing with this, China had been growing in strength very rapidly and become a presence that the US cannot ignore.
無視できない存在になったというのが現在であります。日本は35年前に為替レートの切り上げと内需拡大という方法をとって結果的に今があるんでありまして、日本の経済は成功したと言っていいかどうか難しい問題があります。むしろ私から見れば失敗したと言っても良いほどの打撃を受けた。それは日本の政策上のいくつかの失敗があったからだというふうに思います。それらを簡単に申し上げますとですね、切り上げるのは当然だが、切り上げ幅の大きさと期間の問題であります。レートを2倍に切り上げるというドラスティックな、普通なら10年かけても良いような切り上げをたったの1、2年で実施してしまったということなんであります。で、当然のことながら国内経済に与える影響は大きくて、慌てて金利をですね、何回も引き下げる。結果、バブルを将来してしまったということです。で、その後どうなったかというふうに言いますと、バブルの崩壊とともに株価や不動産価格などが急落し、そして金融機関の不良債権が拡大し、現実を旨とした日本の大手銀行が崩壊し、そして、金融不況の例をなしまして、金融機関の再編成につながって、その結果はですね、産業政策の長期停滞になってしまったということなんであります。これを全体的に見た場合には、日本の経済政策の失敗というのはですね、為替の切り上げそのものを間違えたというわけではなく。
Put it simply, it is a matter of revaluation, of course, but also of the scale and duration of the revaluation. It took only a year or two to double the rate, a drastic move that could have taken a decade. Naturally, the impact on the domestic economy was huge. The interest rates were cut several times in a panic, leading to a bubble. What happened afterwards was that with the bursting of the bubble, stock prices plummeted, non-performing loans of financial institutions increased, Japan's big banks, which had been built on solidity, collapsed, leading to a financial recession, a restructuring of financial institutions, and a prolonged stagnation of industrial policy. If we look at this as a whole, the failure of Japan's economic policy is not that it made a mistake in revaluing the exchange rate itself, but that with the right revaluation and the right domestic measures, it would have been a force for restraining trade friction, and that the most natural way to adjust the exchange rate is to use it. The current problem between the US and China is trade friction, and there are other ways in which countries with large trade surpluses must take action, such as increasing domestic demand and easing import restrictions, as Japan has done. Even if China were to make concessions on the issue of human rights, it would not help to resolve the trade problem. The US, which has been running a trade deficit for a long time, needs to do something to reduce it. It may need to change its economic system to one that earns more foreign currency, or to one that spends less. We are not alone in our wrestling. And we are always aware of the international community, and we are always thinking about the situation in other countries. We think that about climate change, we think about resources, food, and water. After all, we are part of a community of people who know that the survival of the whole planet depends on our own survival. In order to solve the problems between the US and China, I hope that the US and China will first discuss them thoroughly and find a solution. So in order to solve the problems, including climate change, water shortage, and poverty, we have to address these issues, as they concern the development of the whole planet. In order to solve the problems between China and the US, which concern not only the two countries, but also the whole world. The problem between the US and China is also a problem for Japan. So how the US-China issue is resolved will undoubtedly have an impact on Japan. And the US-China relationship will also affect Japan's economy. So for Japan, we cannot stand by. We must help China and the US resolve their problems. We very much hope that China and the US can grow together. So these are the issues that I have pondered in the New Year holiday. Otherwise, we will have greater instabilities in the world. I hope that Beijing's Winter Olympic Games and Paralympic Games can be a great success in a brighter future. Thank you.